everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of A Better Life, New York. You all know who I am. I'm Steve, and today we have Dom back, and we have a special guest, Simeon. We're here to talk about a topic that we've touched upon in some of our other podcasts where we talked about the assassinations and stories, and that is remote viewing. Simeon is an expert, for lack of a better term. I would say he's an expert. He's interviewed a lot of people around it, and I'd love for him to, he's here to tell his story. Maybe give a little background how you got into this in the beginning.
Yeah, my background's in the sociology, statistics, and research methods. So I know a little bit about how to measure outcomes, look for effect sizes, and so forth. I came across after I got done with graduate school, and I had been teaching for a while. I took a break and I came across this idea of remote viewing, and I was partly curious and skeptical of the thing. I thought I would take a class in it, which I did at the Farsight Institute in Atlanta, Georgia, just to see. It was an 8-day class, and I found it was completely open to any outcome, but I really found results after a couple days in the class. In my own RV work and other students there, people were really describing pictures, distant locations in targets that were hidden in folders that there's just no way ahead of time they could know what was in the subject matter of the viewing session. It seemed that the results sometimes were accurate in a way I couldn't understand how it was working, but when you're doing science, you don't always understand the principle, but you can see that there's results. And it showed me there was something going on, and I didn't quite understand how it was.
Right. Sometimes it's nice if to work back from you get a result, then try to understand what just happened. Just for my audience, our audience, maybe give a little bit of understanding exactly what remote viewing is.
Yeah, so this is the idea that we have access to information beyond our physical set. We're taught in school that information comes to our brain, to our awareness, to our consciousness through our physical senses. And other types of information like intuition or spontaneous thinking, not as well understood. So we're taught to think of that as the psychic phenomena, and we're intrinsically trained to be more skeptical about this sort of information because it's not empirical. It's not as easy verified as things that are right in front of us that we can see and we can have a sense of the quantity and the types of information that are coming to us because it's accessible to us. But in this case, RV is something that people have known about for thousands of years. It comes from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali in India. Patanjali mentioned in his book about this, it was more about how to attain what he called enlightenment. He said, on this path to enlightenment, really part of the Vedic tradition from thousands of years ago, that you would acquire these special powers. And he mentions things like telepathy, precognition, all of the things that we think of as psychic. This would happen to you on the way to enlightenment. We should ignore them. It's not really what your main focus is. So the idea that we can perceive non-local information, people, places, and events has been around for a long time. We had the oracle at Delphi in the Greek tradition. So the idea isn't new, but it's new to us in the West because in the 60s, probably even earlier, the federal government found out that Soviet Union and the Chinese had very strong developed programs in using this type of psychic perception as a weapon. And as they were our adversaries at the time, they felt that if the Soviets had this and Chinese communists had this too, we should develop our own RV program to create our own psychic spies in the United States that were associated with the CIA and defense, which is what they did starting. We're told it started in the early 70s. It might have started before that. I've encountered Vietnam vets who told me they were trained how to do RV remote viewing back in the 60s. I don't know what the system was or who was training them. As far as we know, officially, programs started in the early 70s. developed for about 20.
And that was with Ingo Swann, Pat Price.
Keep your voice up. Yeah. The way it started is they weren't even sure if this was real. Now, the Soviets believed it was real.
So this is different than Manchurian Candidate, where somebody goes in and is brainwashed that something alerts something to them. This is actually perceiving something that someone else has already perceived.
Basically, it's perceiving something, and this is just for ordinary people to perceive something at a distance, which we've all been taught. We don't know how that would work, but the data showed from Soviet studies, Chinese studies, they had a lot of data. If you look at the declassified CIA documents, they were highly concerned about our adversaries having as weapons.
Psychic gap.
Yeah, it was taught. If you look at the documents that Russell Targ, who's one of the people that developed it in our country, he got them declassified. His son was a lawyer, and they declassified them for that movie Third Eye Spies, which I highly recommend people watch. If you want to see one good movie about it, recent Third Eye Spies.
I've never seen.
By Lance Malia. You can find it on all the streaming services. It goes through the history. They got a lot of declassified documents, and all of these documents, you look at it, it all says threat to communication security. Encrypted data, really top secret sort of stuff that you wouldn't want your adversaries being able to see at a distance and possibly know about your military and intelligence efforts. KGB, we're told, had 20 different research organizations involved in RV. China, something like 5, extensively developed. Plus what we call PK, psychokinesis. This is something being able to influence things at a distance. Not just perceive the information, but literally something. These are highly developed programs. Yeah, they started a program, and initially they got Stanford Research Institute, now called Stanford Research International. This is an institute that did classified research for the federal government in Palo Alto. You had Dr. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, both laser physicists, and Hal had extensive experience working with the U.S. intelligence agencies. He'd worked for Naval Intelligence and NSA. They had said, can you tell us if this is real or not? How real is RB, the ability of someone to see something hidden in a folder or in a box that you can't see physically? So the first person they got out was Yuri Geller. Many people have heard of Yuri Geller, and he was in the U.S. for 6 weeks. Someone had told them about him. I think it might have been Edgar Mitchell. There were some contacts with the Israelis, and they were told about this psychic in Israel named Yuri Geller. And they brought him over for 6 weeks. It's in the Third Eye Spies movie. And they had him at the time, before they had invented coordinates or folders or anything. They just put things in boxes. Then Yuri, what's in the box? And you can see in the Third Eye Spies film, he nails it 10 out of 10 times, or 9 out of 10 times. There's no question. It's a little object or an insect. He's getting it every. So he was the first test subject.
Perceiving something that's unseen, though, right?
It's hidden in a box. And this is how they started. They didn't even know the parameters and how well it could work. Yuri, what's in the box? They also had him demonstrate his PK ability. So before Ingo Swann and Pat Price and other viewers that were more familiar now, they had Yuri Geller. But after 6 weeks, the U.S. government became concerned with the security implications, citizen, Israel. So they sent him back. But he did prove to Targ and Puthoff that, and he worked with Lawrence Livermore Lab in there also in the area. He showed them, hey, this person can blindfolded, have something hidden. He could describe it very accurately. So that got them to say, we should look into this more. And again, this was started from the efforts of Edgar Mitchell, 6 Man to Walk on the Moon. Had talked about this, had a belief this was possible. Jim Fletcher, who was the head of NASA at the time. And they got some funding together, and then they went to other psychics. The next person they tested had an ad in the paper. Ingo Swann, who was local, he was a New York City artist, born in Telluride, Colorado. He had done some work with a woman named Gertrude Schmeidler at the City University of New York. And when he did at the time, they had him for this experiment. He came up with this with Gertner. He would affect these things called thermistors that were sealed in these vacuum sealed bottles. Thermistor can measure temperature changes and change them. He proved, and they published a paper that showed that Ingo, with his mind, so this is PK, could affect thermistors in the other side of the room at will, making the temperature go up or down. He saw this ad from Hal Puthoff, and he sent in the paper that he and Schmeidler had published about PK effect on thermistors. And Hal said, fine, come on out. Let's see what you can do. And so the first thing we're told that they had Ingo do was another PK type exercise. They said, Ingo, there is something called a quark detector, very below the cement. This was a device they used for graduate students, highly shielded against vibration from planes or trucks or anything in the area down there, very accurate, had a sinus. They said, Ingo, put your mind on this. They want to see what happened. And I've seen the graphs from the results. Hal showed it to him. Every time Ingo put his mind on this, I think it was either a quark detector magnetometer or something, the sine wave stopped being a sine. 3 times in a row, exactly, and he put his mind on it. He said he could see it, but it had an effect on the device. It's pretty weird. It was disturbing to them because this device was like world-class accurate, should never deviate. Their mind is making deviate. So that showed them, that was the beginning of the program. They had 2 people, first Yuri, then Ingo. And it showed them, wow, we got 2 people, we got 2 experimental results. We can see this is real. And that got the whole program rolling. They realized, wow, this is real. We need to figure out how this works. Train people into how to.
And where was this?
This would have been in 70s.
Was it work for the government or just working on a project funded by the government or?
They were working on a CIA contract. This was definitely a contract. They had $1 million a year or something to spend. Not a huge amount, but it's enough to do some basic research. And they had Ingo stay out there in Palo Alto for months. Now, here's what the story is with Ingo. They kept doing what they had done with Yuri. They said, Ingo, what's in the box? After these initial tests, they had him view things in a box because nobody knew any other way to do RV. Ingo, what's in the box? And as he said, and it's in some of these documentaries, there was another earlier one before Third Eye Spies, just called Remote Viewers by Jim Schnabel, author, researcher. Ingo said, I can put my mind on anything in the trivialization of my ability. I think those are exact words of in Russell. Why don't we do something more interesting than just view things in boxes, right? Because Ingo was a natural born psychic. I just say, just for the historical record, Yuri was not a natural born psychic. He had an encounter with an orb in his apartment complex, which was witnessed by a neighbor. The neighbor came forward recently and said, I saw it happen. He was running away from what we call a ball of light or bull lightning. Made contact with him and he went unconscious and fell down. And when he came to, he had these powers. Saying how it worked is another thing to talk about for another day. Ingo, on the other hand, is born this way. In Telluride, he had a couple psychic experiences as a kid where he just felt like he was out of his body, the whole universe. One of these naturals. They wonder, how are we going to view something else? So the first thing, Dom, that they came up with him on viewing things in books, which he could do just like Yuri, little rings or little truths or objects, had him view coordinates of a map. And they would give him longitude and latitude and say, Ingo, what's at these coordinates? And sometimes he would describe things that were so detailed, they couldn't see it on their map that they had there. So they, according to Russell Targ, they went out to the best bookstore they could find in the area and got the biggest map they could buy at the time. This before online maps and all this.
Red McNally.
Yeah, and they got the biggest, and he was always right. They would see those little detail in these maps that were right at those coordinates. So
Didn't he see rings around a planet before?
well, that might have been at another time. I think that was at a later date. Because at the time they were just working with map coordinates. So the criticism came up at one of these presentations from someone at the CIA. saying, how do you know he's not one of these people with eidetic memory, I believe it's called, who can memorize everything on a map? There are people like this. Just one of these specially gifted people that never forgets and just simply hasn't measured, remember the entire map. So they thought, that's a good criticism. They thought, what else do we do? So here's how the story goes. There's two versions of it. Jacques Vallée has told us, and he, like an entrepreneur, Silicon Valley entrepreneur, and a well-known UFO researcher, by the way, Jacques Vallée.
He's the guy that met a close encounter. He's a Frenchman.
He's the guy. Yeah, exactly right. He's that character. He said that he had discussions with Ingo, thinking maybe the total universe is divided up like a hard drive on our computers into addressable memory spaces. And if you got the right coordinates of the addressable space, you could, in the universe. That's one way it goes. According to Ingo, he was lying in the pool apartment they rented for him in Palo Alto. On the right side of his head at a 45-degree angle, I'm using his words, something like this, very close. This idea came into his head. It was a voice. It said tri-coordinate. So he goes back the next day all excited, not just longitude and latitude, but to make up some numbers and associate it with a particular target. He goes in the next day and a target put up and they say, that'll never work. Institute random numbers with that work. So he said, if you don't do this, I'm quitting. I'm getting bored with this. And he was about to fly back to New York. And they said, okay, we'll try it. So they came up with random numbers and they like on top of a picture, put it in the folder, which is the technique that we use nowadays. It worked. We didn't think it was going to work. So this is how they went from viewing things in a box, viewing things on an atlas, to pick a picture of anything, put it in a folder, give it some numbers, and only tell the viewer those random numbers. And it worked. And that's how the program, and farther, they realized any person that could do this, give them the random coordinates and was at the location. We're talking go inside the structures, go underground, describing detail what's there.
Yeah. He's now passed away. You met Ingo.
Yeah, I did. I was living in New York at the time in 2013. And we knew that he lived downtown. And we used to play this game to see if we could just intuitively locate his apartment because we knew he was lower Manhattan, Bowery area, but we didn't know which street, cross street exactly. We would go on our bikes, a friend of mine and I, we would go out and say, let's just use our gut feeling. Because I've studied RV since 96. My gut going to tell. We got within a block of his apartment. We said, it's somewhere around here. Finally, a friend of mine said, look, he's not going to be around forever. Here's his phone number. I knew someone that used to talk to him, someone in Las Vegas. He gave me his phone number. I called. And I distinctly remember the day he called back. It was over Christmas 2013. And he said, hey, I'm up for a meeting. Why don't you come over? Here's my address. So we arranged a meeting in, I think it was January 2013. I came over. And he's just a really fun, interesting person to talk to. Again, a copy of Opening Minds. And we were planning to come back for dinner. He's someone who really liked to cook and he liked having come over and shoot the breeze about these. I said, Ingo, how does RV really work? You're the master. He said, we'll talk about that next time you're here. I have an article for you. And we talked about all sorts of interesting things. And then I left, and at the time he told me that he had what's called walking pneumonia, which is you have it, but you're not really expressing the symptoms physically. Unfortunately, I'm told after I was there, he went and got a fever, and it got worse. And within 48 hours, he was in the hospital of my visit. I'm told this never happened, and he never recovered. So I'm told he lost consciousness and never came out of it. I did get to meet him, Dom. It was a great meeting. He was a real fun person. I was told he was 80. He was a fun person. He had decades of experience with RV. And we only had one meeting. I'd seen him at the conferences, by the way, IRVA, International Review. Most of them are held in the Vegas area. He was there a few times, also Austin, Texas, 2002. My book stand was right next to Ingo's. So I actually that's where I met him in 2002. And this is where we talked to him a little bit, but it was fun being with him. And yeah, that was the last time I saw him.
Tell the story of how Pat Price was brought into the program.
So this is another,
Who's Pat Price?
yeah. And so the Army program has all these interesting twists and turns. It almost seems like fiction, except it happened. Pat Price was a police commissioner in Burbank, California. He was another natural. And it said while he was the police commissioner in Burbank, the crime rate was very low because he would send squad cars out there where crimes were committed. He just had an intuitive sense. And they would have these people or prevent it from happening.
So it probably happened all the time that people got used to it and didn't give it a second thought.
So he already had a good track record, contacts Oregon and put off, and they test him, and he just knocks it out of the park every session. I was told by someone in the DIA program that whatever Pat viewed, you could take it to the bank. You rarely missed, and his stuff was highly detailed. And here's one thing that they did with Swann and Price to prove to the U.S. government that this could work. They had them view initially, they called someone over at the CIA, and they said, can you just give us some? It was Kit Green, by the way, who was the guy in charge of the strange desk, CIA at the time, in the early 70s. Medical doctor, but the CIA kept tabs on all sorts of phenomena. A lot of what they do is open source. They read articles and spy stuff. They're little absorbing information. This is before internet, so people are cutting out articles. Kid Corey, as the story goes, just went to a guy in the next office. Can you just give me a location? I need a location, and I'll tell you why. The guy chose his summer cabin in West Virginia. They had Swann and Price view it. And neither of them view a cabin. They get this really extensive facility, computers, satellite dishes, file folders with code names all related to the game of pool, like cue, ball, and rack 'em up and all
Nameplates on people.
Yeah, stuff like this. And they don't know what it is. And they call back Kit and they say, we got this and this. And Kit said, no, that's not quite what the target is. It makes sense to them. And Russell said to them, too bad, because the other guy got the same thing. What other guy? We have this new viewer named Pat Price. They knew about Ingo, and the other guy got it. So he went back, he looked on a map, thinking they both got the same thing, this extensive stuff. And he looked right over the hill from this vacation, I believe it was the NSA Sugar Grove facility, which was designed to listen to Soviet satellites, one particular satellite, we're told. It came over at a particular time every day and get as much information from it as they could because it was transmitting to Moscow. And when they looked at what Price and Swann had written down, they were really disturbed. They had written down code names, file folders, locked in secure vaults. So talk about vertical information here. This is stuff you couldn't make up. The government was so concerned, they contacted the National Security Administration and sent out Secret Service agents or some marshals to arrest them in Palo Alto, trespassing on government property. They knew this was going to happen because these guys were they already had proof. They had never left the state of California, and it proved to the intelligence establishment that this could be that accurate. Literally we're talking about reading words off of desks. Think about the implications of that in what the security establishment thought were completely secure facilities, and here people are penetrating it with their psychic. So that's why they got the remainder of the funding. It kept going for over a decade and a half after that because they proved out. Not only can they just be something like Ingo location, they can actually words. And yeah, so that is one of those stories and after that, they started really looking at specific military targets.
After that, was it just initially a military program? You learned from Courtney Brown, right?
Yeah, I learned from Courtney Brown and later Lynn Buchanan, who was also some
Civilians or both military?
Courtney was a political science professor who had taken a course. So, yeah, going back to the history of this, it's declassified in 1990. Their hearings in Congress, they have Ray Hyman, who's a skeptic, and Jessica Utz, who's a neutral statistician, head of the American Statistical AS. And they have them evaluate. And then there's a show on Ted Koppel. They had Robert Gate come over, who was director of the CIA at the time, I believe. And Ed May, who ran the program after Target put off, I believe from 85 till 95, told his bosses the program had been moved to SEIC by the other government contractor and I have talked to Ed May. He would come to some of these conferences and he said, they told him, you can't go to Ted Koppel show. We don't want to be publicly associated with RV. There was a lot of skepticism about it in Congress. He cut some budgets, asked some people who are associated with the program. Ed May said, I don't care. I'm going and saying the other side because it works. And I was there when it worked. And I'm going to talk about how all the successes. Gates talked about all the failures. May went, and he went anyway. And they said he was going to fire him anyway, and they fired him. But he said it was important to tell the public. So it's declassified in 95, and the protocols were never classified, just the particular projects. Even some of them to this day, I'd asked about some of the things that they viewed, and I was told they still can't talk about some of these viewers. You can imagine what the military intelligence agencies use something like this. Actual information still be classified. So the people that were involved in the program started teaching it. One of them was Ed Dames, who had been involved with the program. Yeah, he worked at Fort Meade then. It had been transferred to DIA by that at Fort Meade, and he was like coordinator for the program. But there were other people that were trained just to be viewers. But Ed knew enough from the program to teach it. And some people learned from him. And then other people from the program, like Lynn Buchanan, began teaching it. So Courtney had learned from Ed. And then I studied at Farsight. I was a teacher there. And I also wanted to see, here's one protocol. Is this the main protocol, or were there variations? If you learn it just from one person, you might just get the way they did it. So I learned that there were other variations, and that's what I learned from. I had a couple teachers, and now all of these people who've been involved in the program, most of them have come forward that we know about.
How many viewers would you say that the government was using in the 70s and 80s?
It seemed to be, from my experience, maybe 15 to 20. There were different people trained at different times. People have heard of David Morehouse. There was someone named Paul Smith. All these people have their own courses in it, have taught it. And other viewers, some of them came forward who later on didn't know about it initially because they were still active duty. They've retired since then, so they've come to the conferences. And then we're told there's still some. Dale Graff is another person that was a viewer that later went to run. He worked for Foreign Technology Division of Patterson, and they were responsible for developing the stealth aircraft. And Dale, and I talked to him extensively, developed the technology to make the stealth aircraft invisible to Soviet radar, other radar systems, and combining signal with certain ways to make it seem really small. He went and he was actually a viewer. Now, this is an interesting project he was involved with. You may have heard of this. In the late 70s, under the Carter administration, there was a Libyan pilot that defected with a Soviet bomber and ditched the plane over what's now called Democratic Republic of the Congo. I think it was called Zaire. I mean, that's the name it is now. And they couldn't see the plane. They wanted the plane. The U.S. military television wanted to get the electronics. It was like a Badger bomber or something like that. They wanted that electronics back. They couldn't see it because it was buried below a rainforest. It's a huge rainforest, even to this day. So, desperation, someone said, why don't we try the remote viewer? So they had one viewer, a woman, I don't know her name, over at SRI, look at it. And Dale Graff was another viewer. I think this is public knowledge now. Over at Right Pat.
Carter's actually talked about.
Carter's talked about. They didn't mention the names, but I know the inside of this. The woman Dale got something like, it's next to a red stream, which would suggest iron rich stream. And I think the woman got the location and the cue. I asked Dale, well, what were you told ahead of time? How much information are you given? And Dale said he was given, plane went down somewhere in Africa. That's it. Africa is a big place. And they send in the Delta Force team where the location is, and they're looking for a red stream. And they find the plane, and so Carter
Didn't native help them get over peace?
running with a piece of an
Yeah.
aircraft from a distance and told them, "What's the help?" And they're right on it based on these RV results. And Carter awards a medal of honor to the program, to Dale in particular. Now, according to the story that Dale told me, because the remote view program is organized as a special access program, which means it's horizontally organized, not vertically. People can know about it in different branches of the military intelligence. They don't tell their commanders that it very once. So according to Dale, his bosses were ticked off at him at Right Pat that he's involved in special access program. It's just ego. And they didn't know. Is they're Right Patterson. They should know everything. They don't know about this because it's a special.
Usually military guards look at things.
So they left. So they're ticked off at him and they don't let him go to Washington to get the medal from Carter. Man, block him. He can't leave. I think he ends up getting fired over this, but it turned into a good thing because he gets selected to run the program for a while. And he developed another protocol, which is using dream time to view things, having the target set up while you're sleeping and then write it down as you using some protocol tracks and this. It's a very good book about it. So there are different people involved at different times. And some of them go on to teach this, and it starts. And so I learned it in 96, a year after it's declassified. A lot of it, as I said, was declassified, but some of those programs to this day, you still can't find out what they were actually looking at. It's still considered sensitive.
If you had to guess, do you think that some parts of the government are still using viewers for special issues?
Yeah, I'm told this question comes up at all the conferences, and the people who were involved in it don't know anymore if that's true, because again, special access programs need to know. You would think, given that this is very inexpensive to do, Don was taking my classes. I've had a class in New York City in 2009. Don was there. You can see it's very inexpensive. You get a target, you teach some of the protocols. They don't need much. If you can have satellites or human intelligence,
Or it's not a lot of people too, so you can keep it quiet.
not a lot of people, and you can get a lot of information, and you don't have much to lose, and then you can verify it with technical means. My person's on target. Maybe if the rest of the session looks accurate, maybe the other stuff they're getting that you can't confirm is also accurate. You would think it's still being used. Now, I'm told that the name of what it's called now, the name's been changed from remote to psionics. We are told this because there's been a lot of information coming forth about the UFO programs. And we'll talk about that another time. Sab, ATIP, people like Lou Elizondo have been coming forward recently. I've met some of these people.
It's certainly been in the news, this deep state thing, where now we're going to tell you a lot of stuff about it all of a sudden.
Yeah, and there was that New York Times article in 2017. Right. So here's how RV comes into this. There was a program posed after OSAP, Advanced Weapons Systems Application Program. They give these really esoteric acronyms to hide the true nature of these things. Before OSAP, there was something called the Advanced Theoretical Physics, run by John Alexander, the Army, worked in Los Alamos. So they do this deliberately so it doesn't sound like anything to do with UFOs, and they have plausible deniability, and no one knows what to look for. When you're doing FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act, you have to use words to look for. If you don't know what the words are,
the acronym will go.
You can change the names of these things. They don't call them UFOs. They call them, as the Air Force does now, unmanned aerial systems or unidentified air. They give them these acronyms. First, the public doing the FOIA request don't even know what to look for. And by the way, they have another way even to hide it further, is just to give the stuff to aerospace tech companies that are not even agent to FOIA. But there was a program after OSAP, you might have heard about this, called Kona Blue. It was a leak recently of all this information that's coming forward. Congressional committee created this, told the Pentagon to start reporting to them. They had the task force, and then aeronautics, something research organizations are supposed to report back to Congress. So one of the things they picked up on was something called That's the code name for this special access program. And if you look at these documents, they were going to recreate a remote viewing program to use this viewing, now called psionics, to see if they could get information about what's now called unidentified areas. It's been sanitized. They don't call it UFOs anymore. They call them UAP.
So they want to look into something.
Exactly. See if we can get to now. Kona Blue is not funded. But isn't it interesting? Here we are in 2012, just about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, where the state proposes a big budget UFO research program. I still like UFOs, guys. I'm saying the wrong thing. They proposed this big scale. This is after Skinwalker Ranch. It's another topic for another day. They proposed this program. And one of the, if you look at the
strange things, Skinwalker
Ranch, strange thing, but somebody wanted to keep it going, Steve, because there's a whole budget proposal called Kona Blue, and it includes a remote viewing unit. This came from Senators Inouye and Ted Stevens and Harry Reid from Nevada. Stevens had this site, and that's what got us up going. But here's some proposal. It's just a multi-page document with obviously satellites and sensor systems, remote viewers. It's proposed then to use it. But to answer your question, Dom, from a few minutes ago, I don't know if they're still using it. I wouldn't doubt that they stopped because, again, not that expensive to do. You have nothing to. Let me just say one thing important about RV.
If the people already work for you, what's the difference?
What's the difference? Already working for you, and this doesn't cost as much as a satellite launch, and you could get, as they did with Rain, that Carter, they recovered the backfire Badger bomb or whatever it is, electronics, based surely on 2 viewers. And I can verify that. I've talked to Dale Graff, and obviously Carter talked about it. It was one of the things. When Carter talked about it, apparently he was holding the folder with the name of the program during this press conference or something, and they saw a grill flame on the folder with a special access program. They changed it to the Stargazer. Stargate to grill flame, another. This program, I guess one thing about RV that's very important, it's useful in context of other types of more traditional information, satellites, people, news. If you just do it on its own, it can be accurate, but you don't know. You don't have any way to verify it. And Ingo had said he only did verifiable targets. He would, on his own, he would do something like, was Jupiter looking for
rings around Jupiter.
And they hacked. So this is one example, Steve, how they used, once the program got developed, they would give people targets like, we know Voyager's on its way. Remember the Voyager launch isn't a big deal when Dom and I were in high school. We're both from this area. We went to high school right here. Well, it was exciting. That 17 up this probe going out to the solar system, and it's going past
recordings and music.
And on its way, it's taking pictures of all these planets. So one of the stops was Jupiter. And
using the gravitational pulls, the slingshot.
It's really smart effects to pull it in different directions. And so Ingo says, they said to Ingo, what's Voyager going to find on Jupiter before they get out? And he said, it's got rings. Drawing these rings can be used for small scale things, like what's in the folder and what's around Jupiter. And he sees rings. At the time, everyone, they laugh at him. Come on, we know that Jupiter has rings. When Voyager gets there, they find some faint rings. So that's again showing, wow, you got someone that's good at this. And I got examples in your, what ordinary people can do just from a class like Dom's up at AG. You can see there's the target, and the person draws the racing, just for the audience to look at her. Rocket ship, they draw a rocket ship.
Let's just hold up.
Have any information? I'll go opening minds.
Opening minds.
Yeah, and I'm in order from me. We'll give out my website at the end. Just opening minds, a journey of extraordinary encounters, corrupt circles of resonance. And it's got a couple of chapters of my experience with RV. But take a look at this. We know what this is, Washington Monument, and they draw the Washington Monument. You have no doubt that they made some RV content. Even beginners can do stuff like that.
Question: has there ever been an analysis as to time, its impact on remote viewing in terms of verifiable events past, present, and future.
Yeah, there have been targets done in the past, there are targets done in the future. And it seems to be accurate, just not in present day target, but other time periods.
So the success rate is pretty equal throughout all of that.
When you're dealing with the future, you're dealing with probabilities. The
Right.
future is not laid in stone. My belief, based on the viewing data, there's different branches from any future. There's probability. But the way this has been proved it's true is something called ARV, associated remote viewing, where you view binary outcomes up and down stock market, down commodities, up or. And people that have done this have shown that you can do this and successfully have a higher hit rate than 50%, which is what you get if you surely get.
Right.
And even the best algorithms from Wall Street and places that do this professionally are not much higher than 55% or something, which is still going to have a win rate over a long period of time. But we're talking over years and years. But the remote viewers were able to get 65%, which if you're betting over a long time, you're going to make money. One guy, Tarm and Plutoff both had their own groups. They've talked about this. Russell Tarr's group is called the Spook Group. They had an investor. And I've spoken to people that were in the Spook. And these were graduate students, so they were not allowed to be paid for this, that they would view for this guy, and he would invest silver futures up or down for the firm. And they made a lot of money for him. I'm told it worked until he came in one day with his gold chains, driving his expensive sports car. For these starving graduates, he said to them, guys, this is working so well. Can we do it twice a week instead of once a week? Because you're making so much money for me. Apparently, it never worked yet. Because resented that because they were not allowed to be paid like best sports players on it.
Yeah.
College, they can't pay them. Hal Putoff used this apparently to raise money for a local Waldorf school. And he was working with a dentist or something like this, and they put money into it, and they made enough to build a school. But I'm told this takes a lot of work. It's not like a magic trick you just pick. You got to have basically viewing up and down target. I'll ask you, what are you going to be shown on Friday? The up target, down target. It takes some coordination. So a guy comes along recently, Greg Kolajic, who's a long distance athlete, marathon runner, Canada. It is on his own without any group solo. And he's presented to us, and you can see his site is remote-v. He created a very simple protocol, even without coordinates or anything. You just assign target up, target down to a contrast. Ask yourself, what am I going to show myself on Friday afternoon, the up or down target? You do a little session. And he was able to get 65, even 70% hit rate over 13 years, 5,200 trials. And he told us there's better ways to make money. Like whatever you do, if you spent that much time, you'd make more money, then, you're going to have some misses. But he did prove 65% over 13 years. This is a pretty good success rate. Also, they did this Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. So various people down have tried this just with future prediction, and we're talking like a week ahead. And I think to me, as a former statistician, they show this something's going on here where you're actually seeing the future. Let me tell you another type of experiment. It's called presentience. It would show you picture. It could either be really neutral or it could be graphic, shocking, or something like that with emotional content. They would measure the galvanic skin response. And they found that ahead of the shocking types of targets, which had some violence or sexual content or something like that, they would get a response on the galvanic skin response a couple milliseconds before the computer showed you the target. And they did this over and over. A guy named Darryl Bem did this at Cornell, and Dean Radin, who worked for Ions, did this out in Las Vegas. They reproduced this many times, is that some part of you seems to react before you're shown the picture, even before the computer is chosen. Paired picture is one completely bland, whether having emotional content. You would react more to the ones which shows, they called it presentient.
In the experiment, the sequence was not set. It was random from the computers.
But you would react ahead of time.
Right.
And that would show, and it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, that of these branching timelines that come out of the present, you're reacting to it ahead of time. There's some part of you that knows it before your eyes see it, even if it's just there's another type, short-term future. The ARV, associated with remote view, out to a week or two, and you would beat the odds 50-50, you get more closer to 60-60. Pre-sentience showed that we have an immediate reaction before something happens. So those are two types of evidence that humans have this ability to sense the future. And again, our viewers would have it. Again, it defies what you and I were brought up to believe in school, that there's some sort of sense beyond physical senses of knowing what's in the future, in the present. So yeah, I would say there's data that you can view future. None of this is 100%. And even though Pat Price might have been the most accurate viewer, other people, most viewers occasionally miss a target. Even Joe McMonagle, who was a very highly accomplished reviewer, came out of the Army and teaches today at the Monroe Institute, Virginia. He has said he misses half his targets, but the other half are really accurate. And there's many cases where Soviet military target, extreme accuracy. One case he's known for is Vienna. They had this huge shipyard up in Murmansk or something, or there, Russia. They wanted to know what was in it. And he said, viewed it, said, it's the largest submarine ever built. And it's different than other submarines because the missiles are ahead of the conning, normally on subs. And
Holy on.
He comes up with this. They say that it can't be true. There aren't any subs. Conning top, and it was behind him. And it was an aircraft carrier. Day comes where it rolls out to the North Sea on one of the long tracks, and it's a huge submarine, the biggest that the world's ever seen. And then they said, you were lucky. You just got a lucky guess, right? He didn't view it. He just corrected it. There are cases where it's really accurate, and I would imagine, going back to your question in about 20 minutes, I would imagine they still use it.
Anything specific you think are going on right now, or?
There's obviously a lot going on in the world as we're recording this, and I don't know of any specifics, but I'm told it's been privatized. And again, this is what happens. Advanced technology is the U.S. government farms it out to corporations. I am told this happens with recovered UFO crash materials from people that have worked in these programs. Some of them don't want to be named, so I haven't said who they are. I've talked to various highly accomplished engineers at conferences in other locations where I speak. They've come up to me afterwards and said that this is all privatized. So it's giving you what happens. I mean, with Fortune 500 companies and various aerospace companies. Now, our own senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, attempted to pass the Schumer rounds in the NDAA last year. That's the National Defense Authorization Act that Congress passes every year to fund. And they stripped it out at the last moment. But this bill, the Schumer must know something. And I've asked people, well, how did Chuck Schumer get involved with this? An East Coast senator, how did he get involved? He was obviously friends with Harry Reid, who was a big proponent of this coming forward. He proposed that anything that was given to the defense contract was now property of the U.S. government under eminent domain and would have to be turned over back to the federal government within 180 days of the passage of the Schumer Rounds Act.
Yeah, that's not a quick.
Not a quick death, and there's a reason. The people who opposed it in the Senate were those senators that have big aerospace companies in their district. And they don't want to give this stuff up because they can develop technology out of this. And there's debate about whether it should be subject to eminent domain or not. If these companies put a lot of resources into figuring out how it could work.
Those resources, the money probably came from the government.
The money came from the government anyway. And that's the Schumer argument, is this came from the government. The resources came from the government. Benefits should go back to the public. There's a lot of whether you think this should be open to eminent domain. But I'm just mentioning that as an example because if RV was being used, I don't think we would know about it because it would be in other black budget programs that just like these UFO crafts. Now, our listeners, viewers, they say, Sim, is that for real? I'm convinced it's for real, having talked to all of the people I've talked to, they've described to me what this material looks like under an electron microscope, super dense technology that we can't even come close to with our current level of scientific development we have of developing technology that is engineered on an atomic scale, atom by atom,
Right.
to act like wave guides, interact. This topic of gravitics has come up with these so-called drones that have happened over the tri-state area and various bases around the U.S. and other parts. Big discussion whether this gravitic technology exists. According to the engineers I've talked to, they can't figure out how this crash material works. None of them I've talked to ever said any of these aerospace companies figured it out. I'm told it comes down from NASA to JPL. I'm not giving too many secrets here. To JPL, to aerospace company.
Right.
And they're said, guys, figure out how it works. There's a black budget side to NASA, which people would be surprised, but they do work for the defense.
We know satellites are launched and there's a
Space program, and there's secret launch facilities, which I probably shouldn't talk about too much, but they exist in that. So it would be surprising that any advanced technology like this that has important ramifications for national security would be developed by aerospace companies, including viewing skills. Now, they've developed that. In May, I mentioned him before, someone that ran SRI, that ran the viewing program. And May says he was the longest running director. He ran it longer. You go into SAIC, you ran it longer than you put off in the early days. He said you could put it on a chip. You could develop a remote chip because he believes they figured out what the physical effect is. Some people think it's something called the Aronoff-Bohm effect, which is a quantum effect proposed in the 50s, where particles can interact at a distance with other fields that don't even radiate out. They can be completely sealed, but there's communication going on. The evidence that supports that idea is Hal Puthoff, after leaving SRI, created his own company and patents for long distance communication, the AB effect, what's called magnetic potential. Not an ordinary electromagnetic fields like we're used to. Potential fields that are in just the numbers, imaginary numbers of quantum equation. But the effect is real. It's shown by Tonemura in Japan in '86. I forget which company he worked at the time that proved that this Aronoff-Bohm effect, which sort of seemed like a spooky quantum event, things interacting at a distance, RB, they proved it was real. So some of us think maybe the AB effect is what we're doing when we do our, and I have to admit, Steve, it'd be cool if we identified this principle. The Russians felt like they had actually developed this enough to create a chip, according to Ed May. And the last time he presented, he said he was working with Russian companies or something to develop RV chip, which would suggest it's a physical part. I'm not sure, given our relations with Russia now, if he's even still working with them. I mean, that would consider some sort of security risk to help them develop this technology. As we're recording this
So
now,
what you're saying is it's not just it's that matter's interacting with other matter, being it's been communicated to something that can record what's on the other end of that matter.
yes, that's what Ed May claimed.
Like powerful.
Exactly. There's a physical effect, and a chip could do it just like a human brain. I'm not sure if this is true. This is what he told us. And if it was going on here, that would be definitely classified. I would consider that to have national security. They were concerned when Pat Price could view the Sugar Grove NSA facility. When they asked Pat Price, how did you do this? He said, I just smushed my head into the safe in his imagination, walking down the halls of this Sugar Grove. And he moved into these spaces and looked with his eyes what was there. Can you imagine it's accurate? It seems like science fiction, but it's true.
But it seems like that the government would take people like that, throw them in jail so they couldn't talk to anybody.
Pat Price had an early death, people saying this, and there's a lot of speculation. He was working for the intelligence agencies. We were told he was viewing Soviet targets every day. What's our intelligence organizations? We don't know exactly what happened to him. There's a feeling going on with your previous interview with Dom that he was assassinated by the KGB. Russians who've shown up at these Urva conferences have said when we're talking in a group afterwards, they're sure that's what happened to him because the KG posted about it. There's disinformation that comes out of the former Soviet Union, Russia. You can't be sure. He didn't live a healthy diet either. He didn't eat a healthy diet. He had heart problems. However, we're told there's some weird things that happened. His casket was already sealed.
Didn't somebody see him like a couple of years afterwards?
There was some feeling that he was seen in a supermarket in Virginia or somewhere by someone in DC. They swore it was him, but we don't totally know. Yeah, Steve, I would think the answers to these questions is, I don't know, and nobody knows. Just because I'm suggesting it would have a very high level of classification. And as you both know, and our viewers know, if you're involved with these aerospace companies and you're involved in national security and secrets, there are very high penalties for breaking any disclosure agreements. People I've talked to recently who knew about UFO crash materials, we'll talk about that in another time, told me the consequences talking about what they saw to me would be so severe. This person literally told me they would be financially ruined by the federal government for even mentioning anything beyond that these programs exist, but no specific. They've heard people that testified in front of Congress recently, House Oversight Intelligence Committee, the crash levels on, others said, you hear these Congress people say, well, what did you see? They say, I just literally can't talk about it. We have to go into a closed setting, SCIF, secure compartmentalized information. You've seen people publicly say that because they've signed these NDAs that are very severe of ever talking
When
about
you do with treason.
treason. Yeah,
Okay, when you're dealing with treason on very highly sophisticated things, that means you've given up your freedom. So what am I? They're going to have to be tried.
this is the speculation. Maybe they could receive the death penalty for talking this. So they're not going to talk.
You'll be home.
Now, here's the issue with that. We don't know. And we don't even know, Dom, the answer to your question. Are they still using it? We don't know, for example. I would just assume they are. But if they are, no one's talking about it because probably with
If that's maybe a place to leave it right there. It's great. Start talking about this remote viewing as things go on, and also good the other things you want to talk about from the past that may work their way into it.
So is there anything else you want?
Give you a website.
Yeah, so
Oh,
I've been teaching it ever since. I have classes people can do if they just want to do it anonymously at their own pace. And I have these group classes occasionally. One thing we, for a reason, it can be fun to do is a monthly where we have people at any level and we do a target every month. And that's on Sunday nights if people ever want once a month. As long as people want to join that group, head to a training, feel free. So my website, Tom, thanks for asking. My blog is newcrystalmind.com. New Crystal Mind. That's just where I post interviews and videos and interesting information. My website for viewing, I just called it virtual viewing. For virtual viewing, virtualviewing.org. You can just see what's available so people can train on their own, or they can train with me in classes sometimes, or just once a month join up. If there's interesting, if not, it's fine. There's other books you can read about it. My book, Opening Minds, is just one of many books I've talked about the history of this. And again, that movie I mentioned, Beginning Through Eye Spies script list, you could watch that right now. It's a great introduction to the whole subject.
Thank you so much for coming. It's nice to see that with all you guys here. One thing interesting.
Thanks for watching.
I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of questions about it. I'd probably have a bunch myself, but I thank everybody for watching and listening. If you're listening to us on audio and podcast, please can subscribe and all those things people say. And if you have any questions, there's a link on the audio podcast that you can send me a direct message by clicking on. I thank you all for listening. I thank you guys for being here, and everyone.